Welcome, everyone. I would like to thank everyone who has joined Congressman Marilyn Strickland's telephone town hall, where she will take your questions and listen to your concerns. My name is Dick Muri, and I currently serve as the mayor of the town of Steilacoom, and I will be moderating tonight's town hall. At any point during the call, if you would like to subscribe to Congresswoman Strickland's newsletter, please dial *6. It is now my pleasure to introduce Congressman Strickland for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mayor Muri, and thank you for your leadership with the City of Steilacoom. Thank you to all those who are joining us today for our telephone town hall meeting. I am in Washington, D.C., where we are voting on some very important legislation. So thanks again for being here. And I look forward to taking your questions and hearing directly from you on what's most important to you and your families. Before we continue, however, I want to take a moment to recognize the service and sacrifice of Pierce County Sheriff Deputy Dom Collada. Officer Collada was killed in the line of duty after helping serve a warrant to a man who was wanted for second-degree assault. From what I've been told, he went above and beyond his commitment to our community and to our nation. In addition to his role as deputy, he was also in the National Guard and previously served in the U.S. Army. He was a hero. So I hope we can all take a moment to remember Deputy Collada, his contribution to our community, and keep his young family in our thoughts and prayers. So let's pause for a few seconds. Thank you. All right, thank you for that. Over the last few years, we have overcome a lot, and we've been through a lot as a nation. And I just want to take a moment to recognize how far we've come since I first took office in January of 2021. In many ways, I can't believe that it has already been 1 year, and at the same time, I can't believe it's only been a year. During this time, we have combated COVID, and it's been front and center. We've worked hard to stabilize the economy for the long and short term. The vaccines at the time were just starting to roll out, and I was getting briefed and weighing in on how to best support the South Puget Sound, American families, seniors, veterans, students, and employers who were infected by the pandemic. As plans started to come together and under the leadership of President Biden and House Democrats, we passed the American Rescue Plan, which basically got students back to school, put people back to work, supported small businesses, got money in the pockets of families, and got vaccines in arms at a very fast pace. And we did what we had to do to save lives, help families, and support our brave first responders. Now, a lot has changed since that January, and it looks like we're finally turning the corner on COVID. But no doubt that our nation is more resilient and prepared to tackle future variants without significant disruption to our daily lives. I was also able to weigh in and help shape Congress's plan to finally address our insufficient and crumbling infrastructure. For so long, we have gotten low grades as a nation on our infrastructure, and that includes roads, bridges, airports, all the things that we know we need to really function in daily life. As a member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I was very proud to help work on the bipartisan infrastructure law, which means we're going to upgrade much-needed infrastructure. We're going to put people back to work in jobs that pay well, in good union jobs, investing in fixing our bridges, investing in public transit, our rail system, our ports, and so much more. And again, we're going to create thousands of good-paying jobs right in the South Sound, across the state, and nationwide. Now, there's no denying that we have a long way to go to solve many of the issues that face our communities. And I know many of you have written or called my office regarding the price of gas, inflation, and what's happening in Ukraine. And I look forward to talking further with you about this tonight. But I also want you to know that my office is a resource to you. So far we've helped hundreds of people from across the South Sound recover over $4.6 million for residents through federal government. And we can help you navigate state and federal agencies like the Veterans Administration, Social Security benefits, the Child Tax Credit, and so much more. So if you need help, please call my office at 360-459-8514, and my team is always ready to help you. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I look forward to taking questions and hearing from you. Mayor Muri?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for those remarks. We are now going to take some pre-submitted questions that were collected from constituents prior to the start of the town hall. Once this has concluded, we will then take live questions directly from those on the phone. To ask a question, please dial *3. As a reminder, to subscribe to Congresswoman Strickland's newsletter, please dial *6. So that's *3 to ask a question and *6 to subscribe to the Congresswoman's newsletter. The first question is from Thomas and Elizabeth. They ask, what are you doing to increase the domestic production of oil and gas, and what is Congress doing to control price gouging at the pump?
Great. Well, thank you so much for that question. It's probably one of the most common questions that I receive at my office, and, I knew through this town hall. And I first want to let you know that, it's one thing that's important to remember in all of this. There is one person to blame for why oil and gas prices have spiked recently, and that is Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, who has basically invaded Ukraine, has caused disruption in our global economy, and really doing everything to try and hurt folks. And to counter his aggression and the energy impacts which have resulted from it, the Biden administration with 30 other nations have released 60 million barrels of oil from worldwide emergency oil reserves. Now, the United States supplies the most natural gas and oil in the entire world, and production is already rising with 60% more active oil sites under President Biden than in prior administrations. And we can't lose sight of the fact that domestic producers already have the capacity and capital to drill for more oil. In fact, the government has issued 9,000 permits for drilling that these companies are letting sit unused. These companies are choosing not to drill, choosing instead to funnel their record profits back to shareholders. What I've done is I've signed on to a congressional leadership letter urging them to begin immediate investigations on price gouging within the oil and gas industry, and I'll continue to look for ways to ease the pain. And here's the deal. The price of oil is down to less than $100 a barrel, but the prices at the pump still continue to rise. So we know that there's something going on here with the companies choosing not to use their permits, choosing not to increase the supply, and passing those costs on to consumers. So we are definitely looking into it. But I want to make sure you understand something. We understand the pain and the challenges that people and families are feeling at the pump. And I think one more thing I want to say about this, too, is we also want to make sure that we give people options so they don't have to rely on oil and gas. Are we building out more electric vehicle charging stations? We are investing more in mass transit. And so there are things we can do to both increase the domestic supply, but also provide options for people as well.
Very good. Thank you. The second question is from Linda and Lisa. They ask, when will we see the installation of more infrastructure for EVs, charging stations, in our district, and how will infrastructure dollars improve access to affordable paratransit opportunities?
Great. Well, thank you so much for that question. And Mayor Muri, I know this is near and dear to your heart because you were one of the earliest adopters of electric vehicles. And so in the infrastructure bill, Washington State alone is set to get $8.6 billion. And part of what we're going to do is bring $71 million in EV infrastructure investments to Washington State, plus the ability to apply for $2.5 billion more in grants. And the money will start to flow this year, and we should start to see its impact very soon. Just this week, the city of Steilacoom received funds to install EV stations at their city hall. And there's a provision in the bipartisan infrastructure law that's going to allow paratransit vehicles to use tolled interstate facilities for a reduced charge, which will improve access to communities near tolled expressways. This legislation also has the largest ever investment in public transportation, including $1.8 billion set to go to Washington State alone. So historic investments in electric vehicle charging stations, historic investments in public transit, and really doing what we can to give people more choices.
Well, thank you. But on another note, the town of Steilacoom just got a $50,000 grant from Representative Muri Levitt's office, the state legislature, for EV stations for public works and public safety here in Steilacoom. So we're going to hopefully be one of the leaders in infrastructure. The third question is from Carl. He's asking, what is Congress doing to stop Putin?
Well, that's a very good question. And, as I said earlier, President Putin of Russia is solely responsible for exacerbating inflation and the economic turmoil that we're seeing today. And we're seeing this happen around the world. This is not just happening in the U.S. Last week, the House did pass the Suspending Energy Imports Act from Russia Act, which is aligning with President Biden's recent decision to ban the import of Russian oil and energy products into the U.S. This bill will also diminish Russia in the global economy by denying them access to the World Trade Organization and will strengthen Biden's ability to respond to human rights abuses using targeted sanctions. And so, back to your question, Carl, what are we doing to stop the president of Russia? We are dealing with energy. We're trying to deny access to the World Trade Organization and really working to hurt their economy in a big way. Economic sanctions, we know, can be very powerful. Last week, Congress also passed $13.6 billion in emergency funds for Ukraine. And these funds are going to be used between humanitarian aid and military aid, including millions to help feed and resettle displaced Ukrainians and nearly $2 billion in economic relief for Ukraine and neighboring countries. Earlier today, the Biden administration announced $800 million of assistance to help Ukraine defend itself, which brings the U.S. total security assistance to $1 billion in just the past week. And, today, Congress did have the opportunity to hear from the president of Ukraine, and he did exactly what he's supposed to do. He made a very ardent and passionate plea to his allies, to the U.S., to describe the situation, to really focus on how Vladimir Putin is hurting Ukrainians, and then also just asking for our assistance. So we are stepping up. One thing that President Putin has done is that he has united allies with the U.S. and countries around the world against Russia and the things that he's doing. And what's sad about all of this is that obviously the death and destruction in Ukraine is tragic, but also the fact that the Russians are being hurt by this as well.
Thank you. The fourth question, the next question is from Che. He asks, how are we going to pass voting rights and protect our democracy?
Well, that is a very, very important question right now. As we look at the fact that democracy is in danger right now, there are a few different things that I think of. Obviously what's happening in Ukraine with Russia's unprovoked aggression is really stating that democracy is in danger. This is a sovereign nation, and what President Putin is trying to do is really reconstitute the USSR. He wants to go back to communism instead of democracy and capitalism. When I think about what we're trying to do here in the U.S. with voting rights, the House did pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and it went to the Senate, and it did not pass. There are a few things happening, however. Across the country, there have been 19 states that have passed over 40 laws engaging in voter suppression that are jeopardizing voting rights. And Mark Elias and Eric Holder have been filing lawsuits, and they've been relatively successful. But we must pass the Voting Rights Act in the U.S. Senate. That is so crucial. 2 weeks ago, I had a chance to go to Selma, Alabama, and walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in honor of John Lewis and the work that he did for civil rights and voting rights. And according to the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University, again, legislatures have introduced over 400 bills in 49 states that Democrats contend would restrict access to the ballot box. Without delay, the Senate must pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and protect our democracy. And again, this is about understanding that democracy is in danger. We need to be vigilant. We must turn out in large numbers to vote in every election. And I want to make one important point here. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is going to benefit every single voter in this country. It does not favor one party over the other. It makes it easier to vote. It makes Election Day a national holiday. It increases the time of early voting. It allows people to vote by mail. It does everything possible to make it easier, not harder to vote, because it's a sacred right that we must protect and defend.
Well, thank you. The next question is from David from Pierce County. He asks, recently, Congress passed a bill to help fund the United States Postal Service. Does this bill include provisions that would require the United States Postal Service to purchase electric vehicles?
Well, thank you for that question. You know, as divided as Congress can be, we have moments where we work together in a bipartisan manner, and passing the bill to help fund the U.S. Postal Service was one of those examples. The U.S. Postal Service is a lifeline to so many communities. The U.S. Postal Service helps ensure people get medication, that they get access to communication, and so many vital things. And the U.S. Postal Service employs a lot of veterans, the very people who have served our country. So the question about provisions for electric vehicles, you know, unfortunately, it does not include the EV procurement dollars. However, I'm a co-sponsor of a separate bill that would do exactly that, and I will continue to work with my colleagues to pass it. But, you know, the thing with the Postal Service is that for so long it was considered not solvent, and that's because they were expecting their employees they were expecting the government to pay upfront the cost for retirement plans. That provision has gone away, and we're also going to have Postal Service 6 days a week. So that's a very important lifeline for many people. The United States Postal Service is very popular across the board, regardless of your political affiliation, and this was one bill that did pass in a bipartisan way.
Well, thank you. The next question is from Daniel. He asks, why isn't Donald Trump and others associated with him being held accountable for their lawbreaking?
Well, thank you for that question. My response is this. In February of 2022, the National Archives reported that President Trump took classified documents with him to Mar-a-Lago, his Florida home, potentially violating the Presidential Records Act. And he did this to potentially prevent the National Archives from sending documentation to the select committee that is investigating January 6th. And as a reminder, January 6th was a failed coup attempt to overturn a legitimate election. Now, this is only the most recent instance in a long list of criminal inquiries of his abuses of power. We know that the New York State Attorney General is investigating him. And I voted to impeach the former president on the articles presented, but he has more to answer for. I'm also very proud of the work that Representative Benny Thompson is doing as he chairs the Select Committee, which is investigating January 6th. So far, investigators have spoken to over 650 witnesses. The committee has publicly issued more than 90 subpoenas targeting witnesses that span the members of Trump's inner circle to January 6th rally organizers and extremists. So we will see justice, and I know that people are very impatient with it, but the work is being done, the groundwork is being laid, and a lot of information is being collected.
Well, thank you. This is a long question.
Okay.
The next question is from Sabra from Thurston County.
Okay.
The question is, President Biden has set a goal of 50% reduction of carbon emissions by 2030. The national security threat posed by Russian aggression and our entanglement with Russian oil trade highlights the urgency of transitioning to a national clean energy economy. In light of this, do you support our carbon fee and dividend approach to achieving the president's goal?
Well, thank you for that question. And, you know, as we talk about our dependence or entanglement with the Russian oil trade, we definitely need to transition to a national clean energy economy so we're not dependent on that. But again, I come back to the fact that the United States is the largest producer. And at the same time, you know, we do need a clean energy economy. I strongly support a clean energy economy and a standard, and I advocated for its inclusion in the Build Back Better legislation, which again did pass the House but did not pass the Senate. And there is still a good deal of support for many of the provisions related to climate change, a clean energy tax credit, a greenhouse gas reduction fund, investments in clean buildings, research and development, and more. And even though the Senate did not take this up, I will continue to keep working with my colleagues in both the House and Senate to pass climate legislation. As I mentioned in my speech on the House floor last summer, we cannot afford to wait. And if you saw that speech, I held up pictures of Mount Rainier, what it usually looks like, and how it looked when we had a very hot, dry summer. That is a visual representation of the urgency of climate change and our need to act. Thank you, Sabra.
And the final question from the pre-submitted questions is from Leslie. She asks, I worked with the homeless for many years, and I know that just a roof over their heads won't work. They need mental health treatment facilities and rehab centers. What will you do to address these issues?
Well, thank you for this question, and this is something that I had the opportunity to work on when I was mayor of Tacoma. And, when we talk about people who are not securely housed, we know that this is a very complex problem. There is no one single cause for someone becoming homeless. And we know that, yes, we do need to build more housing. We need to help stabilize folks. And you're right, we do need mental and behavioral health facilities and access to services. We also just, need to have local land use that allows us to build more shelters, to build more permanent supported housing, and to do so many things that we know need to happen. Several bills I've introduced speak to some of these issues. I did introduce with Representative Scott Peters the Build More Housing Near Transit Act. And this was really important to us in Washington State because we are already making massive investments in mass transit, light rail, bus rapid transit, you name it. And so what we're trying to do is really incentivize builders to build more housing near transit stations, because when you have housing near transit, it makes it easier for people to get to work, to get to school, to get to doctor's appointments, and to really handle their basic needs. We also want to make sure that people who serve our country do not end up homeless. And so we passed the Homes for Our Veterans Act, which is going to make it easier for homeless veterans and service providers to meet the needs of their communities. They'll get wraparound services, they'll get mental health treatment, they'll get job training, and anything they need, again, to get their basic needs met. And then finally, another act that we passed was the Foster Act, which is going to provide grants to states and local government to provide child protective services, the ability to train staff and caregivers about the effect of opioid addiction on children under their care. These grants can be used for foster care workforce recruitment and training on the effect of parental opioid use. It's going to be able to use for foster and adoptive parent education on the impact of opioids, and also addictive treatment services for parents. And so, as we talk about the situation and the crisis that we have of people who are not securely housed, who are sleeping outside, sleeping under bridges, and sleeping in tents, it's going to take a multifaceted approach. But I will say this. Federal government can be a very good partner to local government. And so as local governments work to tackle this issue, as they look at regional opportunities, we want to make sure that the federal government can provide resources to communities. The one thing I will observe too, though, for probably 2 or 3 decades now, the federal government has steadily divested in mental health services. And what we've done inadvertently is we put that burden on states and local communities. They do not have the resources they need to meet the demand for mental health services. Washington State, for example, probably falls in the bottom third or bottom quarter of investment in mental health services for people who need them. And so the federal government can definitely play a bigger role, and it's really about working with local government and the plans that they have to get people securely housed and have wraparound services, and how can we at the federal government level support that work. One thing I do want to mention is that, in the Build Back Better Act that did not make it out of the Senate, there was $160 billion that was going to be used for affordable housing. And even if you just divided that by 50, that amount of money going to every state could be transformational when it comes to the housing that we need to be built and how we help those who are most in need.
Okay. Thank you, Congressman Strickland. We are now moving to live questions from tonight's listeners. As a reminder, if you want to ask a question, please dial *3. Our first question is from Renee from Tacoma. We are ready to hear your question. Renee.
When are they going to start worrying about us senior citizens that are living in poverty and helping the veterans?
Well, thank you for that question, and you're right. We have a cadre of senior citizens who are now living in poverty, and sadly, our veterans are part of that population. One of the things that, we're working on is the Fair COLA for Seniors Act, and that is going to use a more accurate metric to calculate the cost of living for senior citizens and making adjustments to federal retirement programs. One of the things that I have suggested for a long time is looking at the increase in the Social Security benefit and indexing it to the regional cost of living. The cost of living is different in every market. And if we index the COLA to where people live, how costs are rising, that is something that is going to be actually more equitable and more fair. And I also support passing legislation to lower prescription drug costs. There is still significant support for this provision in both the House and the Senate, and I plan to work hard to pass this into law. Our seniors and everyone else, by the way, are paying far too much for prescription drugs, and we need to do everything we can to help ensure that this becomes law. And then finally, I will say this, as we look at the situation with a lot of senior citizens, and it varies by family. Some people live alone, some people are in homes that they can no longer afford, and some seniors simply have nowhere to go because the rent is too high. And we know that senior housing is something that we are going to need more of. And so as we talk about building more affordable housing, I really hope that we are looking at housing for senior citizens that is affordable, looking at the number of vouchers that we can increase so that housing and rent are more affordable, but just doing what we can to support this growing population that finds itself falling into poverty. And disproportionately, women who are seniors are finding themselves homeless more often.
Well, thank you. We have a question from Warren from University Place.
Okay.
Go ahead, Warren.
Hi, Congressperson Strickland. I am wondering what you and the Democrats are trying to figure out what to do about the drastically high increase in crime in our area, South Sound, all the way up to Seattle, with homeless people and theft. And I see 15 to 20 stolen cars a day on the side of the road, just smashed out and burned. I wonder what you hope to do for people are not homeless because they're not taking drugs because they're homeless. They're taking drugs because they're they're homeless because they're taking drugs. So what do you have to do to go after the fentanyl dealers and the repeat offenders who just keep offending in our area? What do the Democrats want to do about that? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So, as a lifelong Democrat, every day when I come to work, whether at home in the district or here in Washington, D.C., I am fighting for a nation that is safe, that is just, and that is secure. And regardless of your political affiliation, regardless of your zip code, regardless of your background, we all want to live in safe communities. That is a nonpartisan issue. With that said, it is absolutely true that we are seeing a spike in crime in local communities. I had a conversation with the county executive yesterday, and we were talking about the crime that's happening. And, he pointed out to me that this is not unique to Pierce County. It's not unique to the South Sound, but we can't pretend it doesn't exist. Crime is going up. So I'd say a few things that we can do at the federal level is support the work of local mayors and government entities, whether it's the city or the county. You do what we can with the Department of Justice to provide grants for COPS programs, and those are grants that allow people to hire more police officers to work in community policing. There is the Burn Justice Assistant Grant, and there are a lot of opportunities that we have at the federal level to help local communities get more resources to really look at law enforcement and how we can help them be more successful. And then also, too, we can't deny the effect of mental health and substance abuse disorders, and doing what we can to help provide more resources. So far the spending bill has $857 million dedicated toward that, and $100 million, which is $100 million more than last year. And so, I hear you when it comes to low crime at local levels. At the federal government level, what we're doing is working with our cities, with the Department of Justice, and doing everything we can to provide resources to local communities as they come up with their public safety plans. But as a former mayor, I understand that this is something that people feel every day, and that the paramount duty of local government is public safety. And again, as a member of Congress, as a lifelong Democrat, I am fighting every day for a nation that is safe, that is just, and that is secure. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Congresswoman Strickland. As a reminder, if you want to ask a question, please dial *3. Next question is from Dwight from Roy. Dwight, you're on.
Thank you, Congressman Strickland, for taking this call. We wanted to emphasize the fact that the oil production crisis is forcing prices of gas so high that families are having trouble being able to afford to go to work, to go to school, to go to buy food and whatnot. So something needs to be done about that. And now, and also the fact that going to cars that will only use batteries and be electric, that's going to be a significant investment for people, and not all that many people can afford to do that. And just one last quote thing: when President Biden closes an address, he always says, "God bless our troops," but he doesn't say, "God bless America." And so maybe somebody could bring that up to him, because we think he should be doing that. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your comment. And you're right. The pain that people are feeling at the pump is real. My husband owns a pickup truck, and I remember last week, when he went to get gas, he talked about how much it costs to fill up the tank. And so again, I will come back to the disruption happening around the world because President Vladimir Putin of Russia decided to invade a sovereign nation, and markets are responding to this aggression. It's disrupting supply chains. It's having an effect on the price of oil and gas, and so it is absolutely real. But I want to talk to you a bit about how the market is already making adjustments. As I mentioned earlier, oil is now trading below $100 a barrel, and just last week it was $140 a barrel. So obviously what is happening with us, the sanctions and refusing to buy gas from Russia, is having an impact. I still come back to the fact that the cost of gas has gone down, but what people are paying at the pump has not. So clearly there is something happening with the companies engaging in what I'm just going to call gouging. Let's call it for what it is. And so we're going to continue to look for ways to address it, to really have congressional leadership, talk to these companies and ask them, why are they passing these costs along to the pump when they should be trying to focus on trying to help keep American families whole and making it easy. The other thing I'll talk about, too, is, again, options that we have. And you're right, everyone cannot buy electric vehicles. But what we can do is increase the charging station infrastructure so that people have more options. I support having, any types of incentives we need to get people to buy electric vehicles. And I will tell you that the automobile dealers, the manufacturers, they know that electric vehicles are the future. The U.S. alone sells less than 2% of the cars that we sell in the U.S. are, in fact, electric vehicles. And so the demand is for it around the world. We have to make it easier and, again, more cost-effective for people to own it. And, as far as President Biden saying, God bless the troops, clearly I think that is a nod to his own son who served in the military. But I will say this, if at the end of his speech you're saying, God bless the troops, you are, in fact, saying God bless America, because they're the ones who fight for freedom and democracy.
Thank you. Our next question is from Danica.
Okay.
Danica, you are on.
Hi. I just want to know if what your take is on bullying in school. My kid recently was bullied and pushed up against the wall, and I want to know what kind of things are going on with bullying to hold those accountable so that they aren't getting away with these kind of things.
Well, thank you so much for that question. I sometimes say that I am thankful that I am not a student in middle school or high school right now, especially given how social media and just some of the challenges that you see young people face every day. And, I'll say a few things. When adults respond quickly and consistently to bullying behavior, they send a message that it's not acceptable. And research shows that this can stop bullying behavior over time. But this isn't necessarily going to make your son feel good. We have a Safe Schools Improvement Act of 2021, of which I am a co-sponsor, and it requires local school districts to establish policies that prevent and prohibit bullying and harassment of elementary and secondary school students. And in particular, these policies must prohibit bullying and harassment based on race, color, origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, or religion. And, I would also say this right now, and I've noticed this not just in children, but in adults as well. This is a time in the world, in America, when we are emotionally vulnerable, people's nerves are frayed, and you're just seeing bad behavior manifest itself in so many different ways, whether it is more bullying by other children at schools, whether it's unruly airline passengers who refuse to comply with rules, the way people are driving, we are just under stress right now as human beings. And so, to your son who's being bullied, my heart goes out to him. I was bullied myself when I was in elementary school. And so I know how horrible it can feel. But I would say, adults have to respond quickly and consistently. As a parent, you need to work with your school board and school administration. And again, there is the Safe Schools Improvement Act of 2021, which is going to require local school districts to establish policies that prevent and prohibit bullying. But in many cases, sadly, bullying, abusive, and intimidating behavior is often learned behavior. And kids who do that in school are often getting that type of behavior to them. They are victims of that type of behavior at home often. So just overall, I am definitely sympathetic with you as a parent. Speak to your school board. But again, we are working on legislation at the federal level, the Safe Schools Improvement Act of 2021. So thank you so much for that question and for sharing your family story.
Well, thank you. Next question, James from Edgewood. Welcome, James.
Hi. I live in Edgewood, Washington. Mm-hmm. And in this area, they have lots of warehouses with big flat roofs. And I'm wondering if there's any movement in the federal government to work with the communities and the landowners to put solar panels on those to produce energy. And then the second one is there is a rail line that runs from the Puyallup main line out toward Orting, and I'm wondering if there's any movement from the federal government to try and encourage a commuter line from that area to Puyallup to reduce the traffic from Orting and out of East Puyallup.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. And so I will take the first one about solar panel coverage. And you are right because, so much of the economic development plan in Sumner is a lot of warehouses, and warehouses have a lot of roof space where you can put solar panels. There is some money in the Infrastructure Act to put solar panels on, and there are already programs in place at the federal level to incentivize installation of solar panels. But I know that this is not enough. With the Build Back Better Act, the one that made it out of the House and did not pass in the Senate, there are significant investments in clean energy tax credits. And this is really where you can incentivize companies and property owners to actually put things like solar panels and other clean energy opportunities. And, sadly, this bill is not likely to pass, but there is significant momentum in both chambers around many elements of that bill. So what we have to do is this. We have to probably work to pass a pared-down version of that bill into law. And as I mentioned earlier, we do not have the luxury of waiting to address climate change. And also, too, so much of this is really about, what is your local public utility doing? I know, for example, with Tacoma Public Utilities, they actually took one of their rooftops and they put solar panels on them, and they actually offered a program where you could buy solar shares. And by using that energy, it's part of your energy bill, and it's opportunity to actually get some cash back at some point. And so I'm a big fan of utilizing the rooftop space that we have. Again, we have incentives at the federal level, but we know it's not enough. And also working with your local utilities could be one way to do some work like that as well.
Well, thank you. Our next question is from Matt. Matt, you're on.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. My question was more of a comment, really. With the recent stress on gun violence and restrictions placed upon the people, especially in Washington with the new magazine ban, why are there always exceptions written for law enforcement? And why don't government officials lead by example and restrict their protection to follow all local gun regulations?
Well, thank you. That is a very complex question. And, when we talk about gun laws, we want to make sure that, the types of guns that are used, especially some of the ones, the automatic weapons that you talk about, those are made to hurt large numbers of people very quickly. And I know that policing is a very localized issue because it's a relationship that departments have with the communities they serve. So as far as, requiring law enforcement and government employees to follow all state and federal guidelines, I think it really depends on, how we want to look at public safety and how people need different types of equipment. We did pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act at the federal level through the House. Sadly, it didn't make it out of the Senate, and they worked very hard to come up with a version of it, but it just didn't happen. And what we wanted to do in that act, which, by the way, was not radical at all, it was a way to hold people accountable by eliminating qualified immunity, by banning chokeholds, and making body cameras for law enforcement mandatory. I think this is a good example where having cameras in place can help people get to what actually happened. And public safety, in essence, means that every single person who lives in a community feels safe. I was also proud to stand with my colleagues in voting for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And again, the reforms aren't necessarily bold or out there, but it's just common sense protection for people who are doing right and want to do the right thing. So, as far as talking about, the types of rules that we have for law enforcement versus citizens in general, law enforcement typically has a lot of training when it comes to firearms, and they're the ones who are typically authorized to use it. But at the end of the day, here's what's happening in America. Too many people every day die from gun violence. Gun violence is typically perpetrated by men, young men to be specific. And so as we look at the combination of laws that we're trying to do, common sense gun reform, looking at police accountability, we also have to ask ourselves, what is happening in our society where young men think that gun violence is the answer to solve problems?
Well, thank you. As a reminder, if you would like to subscribe to Congresswoman Strickland's newsletter to learn more about the work she is doing to serve the South Sound, please dial *6 now. Our next question is from James from Olympia. James, you are on.
Hi, good evening, Representative. I have a couple of questions. First one is, how do you justify the pearl-clutching of the invasion of Ukraine when members of both parties have been complicit in war crimes of a similar nature, including the current President Joe Biden? And do you support a no-fly zone? And if so, how do you suppose we enforce that without starting World War III? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So, as far as our reaction to what is happening in Ukraine versus other similar actions, here's what is different. President Vladimir Putin wants to undermine democracy by invading a sovereign nation. He thought that NATO would be divided. He thought that this would actually be a divisive issue for the United States, and it has done the opposite. NATO is united. Countries around the world have united against him as a war criminal and someone who is attacking and killing civilians. Now, as far as, why this is different, again, yes, this is about Russia invading Ukraine, but he will not stop at this. And so the fact that we as a global community are united against President Putin and what he's doing, the fact that we are willing to issue sanctions is very important. Now, your question about a no-fly zone is a really good one and an interesting one. And basically, a no-fly zone is an act of war. The United States would likely have to enforce it, which would mean shooting down Russian planes. And some Russian planes can also attack Ukraine from Russian airspace, which would not be affected by a no-fly zone. And so what we're going to do with the lead of the Biden administration and the Secretary of State and the experts that they have in the military space is to focus on sanctions, giving Ukraine what they need to defend themselves, including sending military equipment, like the announcement today that the President made for an additional $800 million of assistance to help Ukraine defend itself, which brings a total U.S. security assistance to Ukraine so far to $1 billion in just the past week, and a total of $2 billion since the beginning of the Biden administration. So this is, this is not an easy dilemma to address. We want to support the people of Ukraine. And there's a Ukrainian population in the South Sound, even in the city of Tacoma, and they are very worried about what's happening here at home. And so we want to demonstrate that we support them. The people of Ukraine are resolute, and they are fighters, and they are going to defend their homeland. And I think it's important for us as a global leader and a superpower, but also understanding the role of NATO and the role of all of our other allies, that we're going to do what we can to help Ukraine defend themselves, and again, not getting pulled into something that will literally be a declaration of war. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Our next question is from Lauren from Lakewood. Lauren, you are now on.
Hello, Marilyn. I just want to express my appreciation for your empathy, awareness, knowledge of issues, and your inclusion. I'm transgender, retired Army, 20 years bomb disposal, and also retired recently Homeland Security at SeaTac Airport as an explosive specialist. I've listened to all these callers, and I embellish their issues and their concerns. And I could spend hours talking with you, but I don't want to take up all the time because of their callers. But so many issues, and everything you responded to, it hits a familiar rhyme with me.
Well, thank you so much for that comment. First of all, thank you so much for your service to our country. And we want to make sure that, we live in a nation that is equitable, that embraces diversity, and really understands that every single person, regardless of their background, has strengths. So thank you for your service to our nation. We appreciate you and honor you and lift you up.
Well, thank you. Our next question is from Chris. Chris, you are on.
I'd like to find out. There's a pipeline for the oil to come through. Why was that project shut down completely? And can it be reopened to lower the price of fuel for us?
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about is the Keystone pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline. And I want to make sure that people understand, this is not a new pipeline. It's basically a shortcut of an existing one. So this would not be opening up new production or new sources of oil for us. Secondly, the current pipeline has in past weeks been transferring about 500,000 barrels per day. So it's capable of at least double that capacity. And this is not a conversation about volume. It's a question about production. But I still want to come back to my original point. There are 9,000 permits that oil and gas companies are sitting on that they could choose to use to increase the supply. They are choosing not to do that. The price of oil is now below $100 a barrel, yet the price of oil at the gas pump is going up. So there's price gouging going on. We need to hold them accountable, and we have to talk about, what's it going to take for them to produce more oil with the 9,000 permits that they already hold.
Well, thank you. Hey, our next question is from Stuart. Stuart, you are now on. Stuart, can you hear us? Okay, I think Stuart must have dropped off. Shannon. Shannon from, can you go ahead? Shannon from Faircrest, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. This is Shannon from Faircrest. I'm one of your constituents. I'm also an elected official, a council member in the city of Faircrest. And one question my constituents have for you is, when Moderna presents their data, which they said they will do imminently for under 5s, will you go ahead and ask the FDA to review it immediately? And do you support the right of physicians to prescribe the under 5 vaccine for children for coronavirus off-label, in light of the fact that 1/3 of all the COVID deaths in children occurred during the Omicron surge recently, and in light of the fact that COVID persists as a top 5 cause of mortality in children under 5 years old?
Great. Well, thank you for your service to the city of Faircrest. I appreciate you, and thank you for that question. So, yes, FDA is going to review the Moderna vaccine. And, I just tell folks, trust the science, trust the research. Vaccines are safe and effective, and we must be able to vaccinate as many people in this country. And I remind folks that, as young children who go to school right now, vaccines are required. And so, again, this is about supporting the science and making the vaccine available to as many people as possible, including children under 5. I have a few friends who have children in preschool. And even though we're talking about, going back to our regularly scheduled programming and resuming our activities, they still remain very afraid for their children. And so, I support trusting the science. I support the FDA doing a thorough approval process. And when they decide the vaccine is available for children under 5, I encourage parents to get their kids vaccinated, just like they did before they started going to school.
Well, thank you. I want to thank all of you for your very insightful questions and for participating in tonight's town hall. As a reminder, if you would like to subscribe to Congresswoman Strickland's newsletter to learn more about the work she is doing to serve the South Sound, please dial *6 now. Before we end, I would like to turn it over to Congresswoman Strickland for some closing remarks.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mayor Muri, for serving as moderator and being part of this town hall. We know that because we've been in pandemic mode for, nearly 2 years now, we haven't had the opportunity to do these in person. So I look forward to starting to do these in person when we feel comfortable that it's going to be safe for people to attend. I look forward to seeing people's faces and getting to know more of you in the district, so I thank you for that. And I just want to say overall, I think about the 1 year and a few months that I've had the privilege of serving in Congress. And it's been a privilege despite the fact that we have been in a pandemic, that we had an insurrection, that we are now dealing with, a war happening in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine. But at the same time, I think we can't forget that a lot of good has happened in the past year. Because of the American Rescue Plan, we were able to really try to address the pandemic in a meaningful way, getting vaccines in arms, having a child tax credit for families that were struggling, doing a lot that we could to support our local small businesses, and really just making sure that the federal government was putting resources into local government, into state government, into tribal nations. We passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill, and even though things seem so divided here in Congress, there are these moments when we do and can work together. I tell folks that regardless of your political affiliation, we should all be worried that Russia is trying to undermine democracy. Despite your political affiliation, we should all want safe communities, and I think we all do. And despite your political affiliation, I hear this from so many people when I talk to them and when I talk to them on the phone or I meet them in person. People are exhausted from the bickering. They want us to come together as a nation. We are better than this. And so I'm hoping that as we move forward in 2022, that we find ways to find common ground. I hope that all the infrastructure money that we're sending into local communities is going to get deployed as quickly as possible for broadband, for clean water, to fix roads and bridges, and just keeping our nation safe, just, and secure. So my parting words are this. People are struggling right now, and we're a little fragile and our nerves are frayed. Let's just be kind to each other. Let's give each other grace, and remember that regardless of where you come from, this is the United States of America, and this home, this place belongs to all of us. Thanks so much for joining me tonight, and have a good evening.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Strickland, and we appreciate your time tonight. For those who still have questions they would like answered, please press 1 after this call ends, and you will have the opportunity to leave a voicemail, and Congresswoman Strickland's staff will be sure to get you a response. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful evening.